call to order the meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council Ordinance Committee of November 16th. Ms. Peterson, will you please call the roll?
Chair Bendy White.
Here.
Member House.
Here.
Member Hotchkiss.
Here.
Thank you. Would you like to read our day's work, please?
The item before you today is the REACH Code Energy Efficiency Standards, and the Chief Building Official, George Estrella, will be making the presentation.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Estrella.
Hello. Thank you, members of the City Ordinance Committee. My name is George Estrella, Chief Building Official. I manage the Building and Safety Division. With me today, I also have Mr. Mike Gable of Gable & Associates, who's also the energy consultant with the California Edison Company. In the audience, I'd like to acknowledge and who would be available for questions and answers. Also, the Javier Mariscal, Southern California Edison Code Standards Program. Patricia Bartoli-Weeble, the Southern California Edison Region Manager. And Mr. Ron Gorman with the Southern California Gas Company. I'd like to share a little bit of brief history. At the September 28, 2010 City Council received a presentation by Mr. Mariscal of the Edison Company regarding a South Coast Energy REACH Code proposal. And during the presentation, he made a couple of points I'd like to just re-emphasize. Well, one of the points was that the California Public Utilities Commission...
Are you on there, George?
Sorry. Pacific Gas and Electric Company, Southern California Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric Company, and the Southern California Gas Company are collaboratively pursuing a REACH Code program throughout the state of California. We're not the only jurisdiction on the map on that. The California Public Utilities Commission is also funding this charge. And why is that? It's because the California Air Resources Board has determined that 1 kilowatt hour of electricity saved reduces about 1 pound of carbon dioxide, and thus the utility companies are directly involved. Additionally, AB 32, which was adopted a few years ago by the state, has a series of executive orders designed to combat climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Also, the proposed Energy REACH Code can be customized for each city or county. And so if there's any adjustments that may be needed or required to get the ordinance proposed, we can also make some adjustments as needed. Also, an energy cost effectiveness study has been completed for Climate Zone 6, which the City of Santa Barbara is located in. The study was prepared by the Edison Company at no charge to the City of Santa Barbara, and a copy has been provided to you. The energy cost effectiveness study demonstrates cost effectiveness of the proposed Energy REACH Code ordinance. As example, in the study, we would look at a residential structure or low-rise residential that would be required to be 15% more energy efficient. And that would probably cost about 75 cents per square foot. Remembering that the average cost of construction for residential ranges anywhere probably from $300 to $400 per square foot, more on average about $350. An extra dollar per square foot would achieve the 15% energy efficiency. Also stated that the adoption of a REACH Code would not affect any incentive programs offered by either the electric or gas utility companies. After receiving the presentation from Mr. Mariscal of the Edison Company, Council voted and directed staff to conduct public outreach and prepare an ordinance amendments for the South Coast Energy REACH Code and bring this before the city's ordinance committee. So that's what you have before you today. The proposed Energy REACH Code would amend Santa Barbara Municipal Code, Chapter 22.82, Energy Efficient Standards Ordinance, which was based on the now dated 2005 California Energy Code. So the proposed REACH Code is based on the 2008 California Energy Code. Just a little bit of a history. The proposed REACH Code you have before you is actually an extension of the previous Architecture 2030 Energy Code, which City Council adopted and actually was enacted in March of 2008. Obviously, when the 2008 California Energy Code regulations came out, the new updated codes, the ordinance was sunset. Regarding public outreach, on October 22nd, we had a public outreach at the David Gephardt Public Meeting Room at 630 Garden Street. Representatives from the Southern California Gas Company, Edison Company were present. Notification of the meeting was sent out by various emails and communications, both by the city's land development team bulletin, the Santa Barbara Contractors Association, our local AIA, the Community Environmental Council, and the draft ordinance was placed on the city's webpage for viewing. And prior to covering highlights of the ordinance itself, there are some items I'd like to have corrected or amended in your ordinance. I'd like to point those out. There's about 5 items that need adjustment. So if you can please turn to the ordinance, page 3. Under section 22.82.030, adaptability, number 3, any addition to an existing non-residential high-rise building, in that sentence that says 100 square feet, that should be increased to 500 square feet. And there's a few more of those adjustments. If you please turn to page 5, in the lower portion of the page, item B, high-rise residential, hotel, motel, guest, you also see 100 square feet. That should be increased to 500 square feet. Also on page 6, at the bottom of the page, item C, non-residential, about the third sentence, 100 square feet should also be increased to 500 square feet. On page 7.
Just stop 1 second. I'm sure Mr. Hotchkiss will be delighted to hear this. Anyway, that there are 3 changes to the ordinance so far that have increased basically trigger points from 100 to 500 square feet. On that would be on pages 3, 5, and 6.
So, these are residential or non-residential?
Both. Next to the bottom, second from the bottom paragraphs, number C or letter C in that paragraph, 100 is changed to 500.
And we have 2 more changes. Page 7, please.
Our copy is not complete. It doesn't have a AC. I received it from the AI.
Page 6, you do not have a page 6 that has a C on it.
A, B, and then page 7 does not have C.
Page 6.
Page 6 does not have a C.
Okay, page 6 does not have a C, so we need to get some. Just maybe do you have a slip up here to speak?
Yes.
Okay, great. When you come up to speak, let's see if we can get this figured out. Thank you, Mr. Estrella.
On page 7, in the center, 2 under small alterations exception, item 2 there. 100 feet should be increased to 500 square feet.
Okay.
And lastly, on page 8, in the center, under item 2, additions to existing, item 2A, it says 10% less than the TDV. That should be 15%.
That's additional.
Yes, additional, right, 2A, correct.
Okay, great.
With that, I'd like to turn this over to Mr. Mike Gable, who can give you a brief overview of the ordinance and highlights, and staff is prepared to address any questions at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Estrella. Mr. Gable?
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I'm just going to point out the changes in this revised ordinance from the previous version, and then I'll reserve most of my comments in response to questions and comments.
Thank you.
The change, as George suggested, is that the basis for this revised ordinance is the state's 2008 standards, which took effect actually just in January this year. At the state level, the change in the code from 2005 to 2008 are actually not a lot tighter in mild coastal climates. In inland climates, they became a lot tighter. except for in commercial buildings, the envelope prescriptive requirements are kind of tight, even in the Santa Barbara area. So I'll acknowledge that that was a big tightening of the state standard. The previous ordinance required low-rise residential buildings to exceed the state code by 20%. That's been now reduced to 15% with respect to the state code. The previous ordinance had non-residential commercial buildings exceeding the 2005 standards by 10%. Now that's been increased to 15%. So commercial buildings has been tightened a little bit with respect to state code under this version, this proposal, essentially. The reason for just to give you a minute on the 15% and what's significant about that, the California Green Building Standards has what's called Tier 1, Tier 2 voluntary standards. The Tier 1 is 15%. The solar PV tax credits for residential and commercial buildings, new construction, you have to prove 15% better than code to get the state tax credits for solar PV. Utility programs often are requiring 15% better than code to get utility incentives, which, as George said, doesn't affect, this ordinance would not affect eligibility of permit owners to get incentives. So the 15% also is virtually everybody else in the state who's gone in for a REACH code has used 15% for both residential and non-residential. That's 17 ordinances approved by the Commission so far, another 5 waiting to be approved by the Commission. And finally, the studies that we did, the cost effectiveness analysis was also pegged at the 15%. So there's a little bit of background and consensus on the 15%. And that's about all I have to probably say at this point.
Great. Thank you. Mr. House has a question?
Okay, thanks for explaining that. I didn't see where it connected, but it connects to your analysis in the back here, so that's all consistent. Just on the top of page 5, under A1, new low-rise residential buildings. Low-rise residential buildings in A. Mr. Estrella, I see the 100 square foot threshold there as well. Was that intended to be 500? Or is that expected to stay at the 100?
No, I think the proposal is to keep it as it was in the previous ordinance at 100 square feet, and here's why. If a permit applicant comes in with a small addition less than 100 square feet, there's a simple prescriptive way they can comply with state code. It does not require an analysis, does not require any fancy calculations, and we don't want to put on the permit applicant the requirement to do a whole more difficult, complicated analysis to meet a local ordinance. So basically, the 100 square feet or less, small addition, the construction costs less than $30,000 or so, there'd be no incremental requirement at the local level. And so over that, it's triggered by it's set that way to be consistent with the state energy code. Once you're over 100 square feet, you're kind of into a different ball game anyway.
Then would you take a minute with the rationale for changing the other 100 square feet threshold to 500, please?
Well, I think in thinking about the fact that the state code has increased in its stringency somewhat, and given the economy and given the general climate, we think that maybe the 100 square feet is a little tough for people to deal with respect to state code, 15%. And that's the other point, that the fact that we're requiring a little bit more incremental improvement over state code. So if we're going to ask more of the building owner and the permit applicant, the thinking is let there be additions that are a little bit bigger before they trigger the requirement. And it's just seemed like an appropriate and reasonable thing to do this time around.
Where did the 100 number come from?
Previously? I think it came really for just consistency and simplicity with respect to the residential standards and the code in effect at the time. It seemed like a reasonable requirement under the old code, the old state code. So
none of those actually hooked to some science. It's more just a sense of plausibility.
It seemed reasonable, and it was consistent with the residential requirement at the time. So,
okay, thank you.
Mr. Hotchkiss, do you have questions?
Let's hear public comment first.
Okay. I'd like to open the public comment then, and the first speaker is Daryl Deinhard.
Good afternoon, City Council. My name is Daryl Deinhard. I've been in Santa Barbara since about 1961, 20 years as an electrician, 5 years as an electrical contractor. I worked for the County of Santa Barbara for 10 years as electrical specialty inspector. During that process, I plan check plans, enforced these Title 24 requirements. I've been familiar with them since 1965 when they were first introduced in the state of California. I've gone through this process and still do today to do energy requirements. I think that you need to know, if you don't already, that there have been tens of thousands of hours by hundreds of people over the last, since 1965, on a consistent basis of upgrading these energy requirements. It has been extensive. They've gone so far, and it was mentioned earlier about the different regions. To take this another step and say, well, they don't agree with that region, you know, it kind of baffles me why just arbitrarily they pick 15%. The other thing that comes to mind is that to comply or even to prove that you've met or beat this 15%, you have to do Title 24. You've got to do all the calculations. Just the electrical alone takes anywhere from 10 to 15 forms and fills up a whole 24 by 36-inch sheet. So I ask now, and understand this building and development, do you have forms? Do you have a process by which you will make this determination?
Please speak to us, Mr. Deinhardt, and then we'll ask the questions.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
So you just want statements from me and not questions?
You can ask the questions, but ask them of us, and then
I'm sorry. So I ask you, you know, how will that department make that determination? What documentation is to be provided? Has it been developed now? Do you know how long it's going to take to do that? How many from city staff will it take to make additional determinations as to whether or not a project meets Title 24 and then goes one step more to do this 15%? Who within that department is going to be trained to do this activity? Is it going to be a professional? Is it going to be, you know, basically a clerk? So those are some questions I have in regard to the documentation. The findings of this particular ordinance I find rather strange, in that they are saying, I read this from this, and it says these are reasonably necessary due to local climatic conditions. Well, hasn't that been dealt with, you know, with Title 24? What substantiation do you have in front of you that defines the difference between the climatic conditions in Santa Barbara and the zone requirement in Title 24? Okay, so that's a question.
You're going to need to wrap up here. And what, by the way,
well,
it'd be great if you could provide us the written questions. I know staff is getting the ones that you're asking so far, but they're very good questions, and we'd certainly like to be processing these as we go forward.
Well, unfortunately, I didn't hear about this until yesterday.
Okay, well, we're launching today, so we're not anywhere near done. So
okay, well, I'm glad to hear that.
So we have an opportunity to address your questions.
You're launching today. How many public hearings will there be before the proposed adoption?
Don't know.
Don't know.
But this is a start. We're starting today. So,
well, I will wrap this up.
Yeah, and kindly do provide us the list of questions, because you obviously are a veteran of the field and have good insights, and they do need to be answered.
I did hear that there was supposedly a public outreach program. I heard that 2 utility companies were there. I'm very interested in those meetings as to who else was there, and whether or not the public was really represented or not. So, the development community.
Please provide us your name and address, and see maybe we have that here. No, only have a name, and then you'll be notified. You can be notified of the next sessions that come up on this.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Input.
Mr. Deinhardt, I have a question or two, if I could. I'd like to, if you have time, stick around afterwards. Let's talk. But just the paperwork alone to fulfill the obligations here, do you have any feel for how long it would take to fulfill that additionally if we adopted these so-called REACH codes?
That's a really good question. And that goes back to you folks in terms of what kind of documentation are you going to require? How are you going to make that determination?
And secondarily, do you not then turn around and charge your client for that because it's your time?
Yes, you can do that. This is going to benefit the design community great because we're going to be charging them twice. We're going to have to charge them once to do Title 24 and then again to do your proposed ordinance.
And what's the hourly rate customary?
It's anywhere from $75 to $150 an hour.
And so we just have got to multiply times hours when we see what the documentation need is.
Well, you see what your documentation is, then you need to give that to the design community for them to comment on what they think and how much it would cost.
And that's just for electrical in this case.
No. In this case, I'm
Electrician.
only speaking to the electrical, which I'm knowledgeable. I can't speak to the mechanical, and the other TV. You've got some other fancy term here that comes out of the lead requirements. I cannot do those, no.
Right.
Those would be additional, by the way.
Absolutely.
Much,
I
much
understand.
more.
Yes. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And I failed to get to start with a 2-minute package on this, and so bear with me if I impose that a little belatedly here. I'd like to give everybody 2 minutes on this. Trish Onenthal, to be followed by Dave Davis.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for your service to our city. And my name's Trish Odenthal. There's debates to any issue, and both sides have their merits. I'm an architectural lighting designer. I've been dealing with Title 24 since 1978. And I believe the ordinance, this new city ordinance, creates an unreasonable burden on businesses and building owners. I believe if a project wants to voluntarily exceed Title 24, that's a meritorious thing to do, and I applaud that. We can find, as part of the design-build team, I work for architects and engineers, helping I specify and select lighting equipment. And we can exceed the code. Their motive to do that is for projects to win awards for being extra energy efficient, to get publicity for being extra energy efficient, to get publicity, all kinds of motives that drive people to do that. If you take that away and mandate that you have to be extraordinarily energy efficient, there's no brownie point for doing it. And to do it creatively isn't as, it's job security for me to have this ordinance, but it makes our job more difficult. The Title 24 is the most stringent energy code in the country. Most other states, the federal code follows our code. Other states adopt our code. It takes years of preparation. And we have committee meetings and we have hearings and all kinds of things. It takes 4 years between when they conceive a code and we finally, that's why we're doing 2008 and 2010.
15 seconds.
It's a long process. So all clients aren't willing to pay for more sophisticated equipment, and the manufacturers create equipment to comply to the code. And if we,
Okay, you need to
so
wrap up.
anyway, let me wrap up with this last sentence. Please give us a few more years for emerging technologies of energy-efficient LED sources and other sources to achieve the necessary brightness, glare control, and cost.
Great. Thank you very much.
Not adopt this ordinance. And please add the Illuminating Engineering Society to your email list. I am the webmaster. I've been president for the past 4 years. And so I'll leave my card with whom to have that happen.
Staff here would be great.
And then in addition to that, I have a petition signed by 10 people in our industry, architects and engineers of our community that also do not want, that are against this ordinance. So whom shall receive
Give it to
that?
staff, please.
Thank you.
And thank you for your input. Dave Davis, to be followed by Karen Feeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dave Davis, the CEO of the Community Environmental Council. We are in support of the REACH code today. Unfortunately, I think some of the previous speakers had not heard the presentation previously made to the council, and I would refer them, or at least staff can refer them to those presentations. There are a number of reasons to do this. It's actually being initiated through direction from the state, the Public Utilities Commission, and the utilities themselves to become leaders in energy efficiency. The goal of this particular process is to head towards zero net energy buildings in 2020. Under the Architecture 2030, which you were state leaders, national leaders, in doing back in 3 years ago, actually was set 2030. Well, the state's moving those goals up, and they're looking for communities to take the lead on how to do it. They're asking the city of Santa Barbara to step forward and be a leader. When it comes to actually what needs to be done, you have to do Title 24 calculations today. The only change here is what goal do you set to do it with the software which is there. I don't believe that there is additional work. There's simply additional goal with what to meet within the project itself. We believe that, in fact, you as a community were a leader 3 years ago. You set basically that goal, and other communities have followed. Today, you're no longer the leader. You're now following other communities which are out there in the forefront. We believe the utilities are asking, how do we reduce energy loading in the future to offset through energy efficiency the need for new power generation facilities which have their own problems? They're asking you as local communities through the state to become leaders to show how it can be done. This is a community which has already shown that leadership. We suggest you continue to do that and adopt the REACH code. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Karen Feeney to be followed by Norman Russell. Daryl.
Hi. Good afternoon. Thank you for considering this. My name's Karen Feeney, and I work with Allen Associates, who's a general contractor here in town. And just a few comments. The proposed ordinance is cost-effective, and the technologies are available to implement it. During your session in September, Allen Associates provided the case studies that were presented as a part of the presentation. And in order to exceed Title 24 by the percentages that they did, those homes incorporated upgraded insulation, high-performance windows, higher efficiency heating systems, solar water heating, efficient water heaters. Really, lighting and electrical was a very small, if any, portion of the technologies that were used to exceed Title 24. So we work with Ms. Odenthal, and I understand maybe there are some concerns when it comes to lighting and electrical, but really to achieve this, that's not the only way to achieve this measure. And I also want to just remind you that during the last 3 years since we adopted this measure previously, and you exceeded Title 24 at the time by 15%, there was no public outcry. The industry was prepared and ready to respond to it. Your staff didn't have issues on implementing it. So I don't think it's as dire as maybe some of the other speakers are presenting, and maybe they need a little bit of education about the bigger picture on things. So thank you very much, and I hope that you will move this forward to the council.
Thank you, Ms. Feeney. Mr. House, Ms. Feeney.
Ms. Feeney, if you would, for just a minute, please. And I'm interested in hearing from practitioners here, especially since the little round of questioning earlier. Not knowing necessarily the forms or whatever we're going to be using for this, but imagining that they couldn't be too different from the typical Title 24, but with a different goal. What would be the additional cost you would expect for processing from your firm for a customer for abiding by or trying to achieve this goal?
Processing from our firm?
Yeah, just
little
the
if
processing.
anything.
I'm not talking about the actual, because the analysis talked about the improvements and how much they would cost per square foot. So that's what the analysis was. Mm-hmm. I'm talking now about what was brought up earlier in terms of preparing the forms for the city and getting them turned in to achieve the 15% plus goal.
I would suggest that you ask Dennis Thompson that, because as the builder, we're more the 75 cents a square foot part of the equation. It's typically in the design phase that the Title 24 calcs are done and the processing of the permits are done. So I couldn't really respond to that.
Okay, thanks. Well, maybe somebody else in here can help us with that. Thank you.
Ms. Feeney? Ms. Feeney?
Excuse me. I just want to be clear about that. So the 75 cents a square foot additional cost that you were talking about, that's your end of it, but that's not the design phase. We don't know what that is. That's an
right.
X factor we're not sure of.
We're the
it's
builder.
additional, but we don't know what it is.
That's correct. And we're the builder. We're the ones that puts it all together.
Yes,
So,
thank you very much.
Norman Russell to be followed by Dennis Thompson. See if I can get this right once.
Good afternoon. I'm Norman Russell. I'm a lighting consultant, and I wanted to talk with you briefly about some issues that are not being addressed here today. There are several metrics associated with lighting And by the way, I am limited to comments regarding lighting, not talking about other forms of energy, specifically lighting. We have to talk about the end result of a lighting design, and that is that the productivity and the comfort and the lack of strain and the well-being of the people who work in those environments. Title 24 is very successful. It's been in progress. It's a progressive development to reduce energy, and it's working. We need to stay within that realm. Trying to go beyond that is going beyond what is already a very limiting a metric to deal within from a lighting standpoint. The thing we need to consider is this: apart from just lighting power density, we have to discuss what the lit illumination of the area that someone is going to live and work in really feels like. How does it work? IES has established some minimum illumination requirements, target illumination levels for all manner of tasks. And if we're blind to those task illumination levels at their minimum, these are minimums, by the way, then we run the risk of under-illuminating some areas in the laudable desire to try and reduce energy. We need to reduce energy costs, but there are many other ways to do that, and the Title 24 is progressing towards that. Controls become a huge part of the issue here. The most efficient light out there is the one that's turned off. So the more we're able to control the environment and when lights are on or not on in that environment, that's a huge savings in energy cost. So I would urge you to consider that there are some downsides to this ordinance. If we under-illuminate, we reduce the productivity at the task level. We also create problems for our elderly citizens in the city as well. So please consider that, and I would urge you to disregard this ordinance.
Thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Mr. Thompson.
Sir, I just have a quick question for you, sir. Just a technical question. I just want to be sure I understand this. What you were just saying was that the most efficient lighting is the one basically it's turned off. In other words, this has to do with controls of the lighting and automatic turning off or whatever, those kinds of things, right?
That's right.
Okay, so the lighting industry is in that game. I mean, that's part of what we're talking about, right?
Absolutely. And I'm not a shill here for the control industry.
No, I didn't mean to. I'm just actually wanting to understand it.
Sure.
So the concern is about under-illumination as an approach to meeting energy efficiency.
Well, when you look at power density factors,
okay,
you're screwing it down to watts per square foot.
Okay.
And that starts to be a very, very limiting factor when some parts of a facility, for example, may require higher illumination levels due to task requirements.
Understood. And so
or
then
for an aging eye.
So the solutions then would have to do with the control of the time that I mean, if we're going to try to meet a reach code, it would have to be how much time that light might be off when it wasn't being used, right?
Right. When we look at the metric of kilowatt hours annually, and we're looking more, and IES is looking at that more and more, there are other metrics that are being regarded as equivalent and more important than just power density.
Very clear. The reason I'm asking this, I'll probably be asking our staff and a little bit more about that as part of the analyses that goes into whether you could meet a reach code using these other methods versus under-illuminating a particular area. Thank you very much, sir.
And I should add that controls are an important part of Title 24 as well. That's not something new.
Go away. I think we have, Mr. Russell, I think we have more.
Yeah, I have a question. So I'm trying to understand exactly where you're coming from, which is if you over-restrict in the goal of energy conservation, if you over-restrict lighting, it's actually counterproductive. Is that what you're saying?
It can be, yes. It can be. For example, may I give you an example?
Sure.
If you have a task illumination area that requires 50-foot candles in broad brushstroke terms, that's a lot of light. It's not necessary to sit by a lamp at more than maybe 20 or 30-foot candles and still be able to read for a young eye. But if that's an older person sitting there reading, or if it's a person that's doing a task that requires 50 or 75 or 100-foot candles, you're up against the code limitation of watts per square foot. And it becomes more important, and you have to do trade-offs. You have to do trade-offs by making it even dimmer in some other parts of the facility to raise the illumination level at that part to get your average watts per square foot. But to be able to have controls that allow us to have higher and lower levels and offness versus onness relative to occupancy, that's much more critical in terms of reducing total energy use.
So I think you're saying be careful when you institute something like
Exactly.
this.
Exactly.
Thank you, Mr. Russell.
Thank you. Thanks for allowing me to speak today.
Oh, thank you for coming. Dennis Thompson to be followed by Ann Kale.
Dennis Thompson of Thompson Naylor Architects, and our firm does mostly residential design, and we've been working under the previous REACH code for the last 2 years or so. We've probably designed a dozen residential projects through this REACH code. It hasn't taken us any extra time. It hasn't cost our consultants any extra time or any extra fee. We're using techniques, as Karen mentioned, of a little more efficient water heater, a little more efficient furnace, a little better insulation. So that was a 20% increase. I'm not worried at all about the 15% increase for this code. I did, however, reach out to my consultants who do more commercial than residential, and they did have some concerns about the 15%. So I would say there might be an area of discussion and compromise on commercial, or I guess it's called non-residential structures, that maybe 10% is a more achievable, readily achievable number. But in terms of the residential design, construction, I haven't had anyone that I'm aware of. No owner has complained, no other architect has complained. These are readily achievable goals that are going toward a good end of energy independence and cutting down on our building of power plants. Any questions before I leave?
I have a question. I think one of the focal areas, if I can use that term, of this conversation obviously has been around lighting. And so as my recollection of the construction process, the architect definitely gets involved in the lighting as part of the orchestrating the whole package. What is your sense of this watts per square foot? How does that fit into the energy situation? Well, I'll be asking the same sort of question of our consultant and staff afterwards. But I think your experience as an architect.
In residential projects, it's a non-issue. We know how to do the lighting controls to meet Title 24, and most of the ways that we exceed Title 24 are through the energy heating envelope. When it comes to commercial buildings, I do defer to my consultants, some of whom are here. And so if they're concerned about reaching it on non-commercial buildings, reaching 15%, I think maybe there should be some discussion about lowering just the non-residential side.
Great. Thank you. And Cale to be followed by Michael Holliday.
Hello, I am a lighting designer, and we work on just about every kind of project type you can imagine, residential all the way through commercial, government, entertainment, just about everything. I basically have three comments, and the last one is more of a question. I like saving energy. I like energy codes. I like when municipalities take the lead and be the leaders in establishing and reducing our energy. I think Title 24, as much as I have complained and groaned about it, it's made me a better lighting designer, quite frankly. I don't like the way the code is written. The way energy codes are written is by power densities, watts per square foot. And really and that's one way of saving energy, but really the best way of saving energy is what a previous speaker referred to as just when you don't need the lighting, you turn it off. When you don't need the lighting, you turn it off. It's just like when you don't need the television on, you turn it off. The reason why we are being asked to reduce lighting loads is not because people are using more lighting. It's because people are plugging in more and more gadgets. Our energy is going up in the state of California, not going down, even though lighting is probably the leader in energy savings throughout the entire United States. So I would like to rewrite Title 24, but you're not asking me to do that today, and that's not what's in front of you. But if Santa Barbara wants to be a leader in saving energy, then we should be writing codes that entice people to turn the TV off. I can design a lighting layout at 1 watt per square foot. I can design it at 0.75 watts per square foot. But if I leave it running 24 hours a day, I've cost you energy, not saved you energy. And that's really what we're after, because we don't want to build more nuclear power plants. Lastly, I have a question for you. And in this ordinance, it may be a good ordinance, I don't know. I found out about it yesterday.
15 seconds.
When Title 24 is revised, and it will reduce, are you still going to make us reduce by 10 to 15%? And my second question is, when we're working on a LEED project where we're looking to reduce by 25 or 35%, are you going to make us take another 10 to 15% off of that? And I think that's not addressed in ordinance, and I ask that you slow this ordinance down or at least speed that consideration up to make sure that that part is covered.
Great. Thank you. Michael Holliday is our final speaker.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Michael Holliday. I am a local architect and also the government relations chairman for the American Institute of Architects. Our board has taken a position to support the REACH code. We think it's a good thing for the city of Santa Barbara to continue to be an environmental leader, and we think it sets the bar high enough that we can achieve it. We were before you 4 or 5 years ago asking for this first consideration, and we stepped up and we did it, and we became international leaders and nationally recognized as a city that for the first time took Architecture 2030 and adopted it as part of code. So it put us on the front page, if you will, as a very progressive, energy-conserving city. All of us have lived under that, and as was mentioned by the previous speaker, we've had to suffer under that to some degree. But you know what? It's made us better lighting designers. It's made us better architects and more energy-conscious professionals. We see this next step as just the next logical thing for us to do, and we're encouraging you, the city, to adopt it and support it. The other thing that was mentioned to me, that this is a performance-based code. So what we're looking for is a performance criteria that promotes creativity. And I think a lot of the ideas that you've been hearing are the types of solutions that we're going to look at. Lights go off when you don't need them. We don't need to leave everything lit all the time. But we got to think about the future, and we're encouraging you to support that.
Great. Question for you, Mr. Holliday.
Mr. Holliday, hi. At what point do you say we've done enough? Two or 3 years ago was great major step forward. Today, great major step forward. 5 years from now, great major step forward. When do we stop?
It's a really good question, and I think it's one that we, the business community, needs to answer. What is going to happen is Title 24 is going to catch up with this code. So we're taking a step here, and in the next couple of years, the state will mandate that we all meet this code. So the Santa Barbara will only be in a leadership role for the next couple of years, and then it's going to be mandatory for the rest of the state. The city of Goleta, by the way, we were out there presented, they stepped up. They said, we want to do this. We think it's the right thing to do. I would think at a certain level, if you look at the graphs of what this country has, the United States graph goes up like this. The California graph goes like this as far as energy use. We are so far below the rest of this country is doing right now. It's really pretty impressive. My sense is, Frank, that at this level, if we adopt this, this is probably going to set a nice course for the future that we don't need to keep beating. There's some major breakthroughs in lighting technology, specifically in the LED technology. If you haven't seen it, it's amazing. And if they've almost hit the perfect where you can match a MR16 light with a couple watt LED light that even replaces not only the halogen but the complex fluorescence. So there's a number of technology breakthroughs that I think are going to get us to that point pretty easily.
Honestly, I doubt that, because we keep coming up with gadgets like this, without which I couldn't live, and probably you too. And I don't know what's the next, but there's going to be another one.
The batteries are getting much better.
But as the speaker pointed out, that's where the proliferation and the need for greater energy comes. So anyway, I just remember 3 years from now what you said today, okay? Because it's prophetic.
Yeah, I think there's always the cost benefit, and I think at this juncture for Santa Barbara to take another leadership role is important for us to continue. We're already in that place, so I don't see that we need to. We're going to always be looking at ways to make intelligent decisions about saving energy, and I think this is one of those measures. And 2 or 3 years from now, we'll have to look at it again. So. Thank you.
One more question, Mr.
Holliday, just a quick question. When you're talking to your clients about this, do you ever talk about energy savings in terms of their the operational cost benefit of being more efficient?
Absolutely. We're working with a high-tech venture capital firm right now that just bought a brand new building. Actually, it's a 25-year-old building, but they're going to be completely renovating it. They came to us and they said, we want this to be a leading example of how to do lighting and energy efficiency. We'd like to be a leader in that realm. So we've got clients coming back to us saying, you guys know how to do this. We're hiring you to do the job. You set the standard and show us what you can do, because we want to have that as part of our company portfolio. We want to do doing our part is what they're looking for in a green, in a sustainable world. Those are the kinds of things and the kind of companies that are moving here and trying to make improvements in our community that do set that standard, because they want to point the finger at themselves and say, look what we did.
Well, Mr. Hawley, let me tell you why I asked you, and maybe you can comment on this. I sit on the Community Action Commission board, and we've been using for many years special funds, and more recently augmented with ARA funds, to energy efficiency retrofit poor people's homes in Santa Barbara County. And the savings for them, now a lot of what you just talked about is kind of on an elite level, but I'm talking about the renters and the people that just barely hold on to their home, and the savings that they're getting from the added insulation, the fixes of the windows, and the just simplest things actually make a difference to them on the bottom line each month. $100, $130, $150 a month savings just right there. From your experience, I mean, is that something that kind of covers the range of this curve of economics? I seem to see it, at least in my experience, on that lower end.
Well, one of the things that was brought up in the city of Goleta when we were recently discussing the same issue was the biggest potential lies in the existing housing stock. We're just not building that much more here in Santa Barbara, even commercial or residential. So we're setting the standard quite high for that. But there's a tremendous opportunity with the existing housing stock to go back and retrofit, and that's part of what Empower Santa Barbara is all about, Santa Barbara County, where we can provide funding to go in and make those kinds of improvements in existing homes, which will be a tremendous benefit. I mean, $200-300 a month that people will save if they made the kind of improvements that you've discussed. So I think that's really where if we want to, Frank, your question was a good one. Where do you look at next? The next thing we need to look at is existing housing stock, and how can we help them and provide funding for them through this Empower Santa Barbara County, which is a pretty innovative program, make those kind of changes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Holliday. Okay, well, let's see, back to the committee, and I think that staff, I'll just turn it back to staff right now and just say, do you want to answer some of the concerns that were raised at this point?
Yes, thank you, Chair White. One of the speakers indicated that there was new forms and new impacts to our building department. I just want to share with you that since the previous Architecture 2030, we have our plan check staff that performs the review. There are no additional forms. It's pretty straightforward. There are the energy programs that are out there and provided by the California Energy Commission that are widely used. It's basically inputting data into that. We review that data. We ensure that whatever percentage above as approved is being met. So under the previous ordinance, 15-20%, depending whether residential, commercial. And there's really little impact to us at that point. I do want to also state that when the Architecture 2030 was implemented, and this ordinance is crafted very similar to that, in fact, almost verbatim with some deletion of verbiage and some changes, there was very few. In fact, I think I received one complaint from the development community. In terms of also getting out information, I just want to be clear, and I want to let everybody know that they can log on to the city's webpage and sign up for our land development team bulletins, in which we give information out as often as possible regarding ordinances such as this. We try to get the word out. Evidently, some folks did not get that particular word. I apologize for that, but we really made a concerted effort with that. Regarding the illumination and square footage, and that seemed to be a big question, and how that plays out. Are we reducing the lighting to a point that people cannot function in their work environment? I'd like to have Mr. Gable respond to that and provide his perspective.
Thank you. Mr. Gable?
Thank you. First, let me say that I really greatly respect and appreciate the comments of the lighting community. I work with folks in the Northern California area, and we're all in the same boat, and the standards are getting harder and harder, and it's at times a real challenge to work with some of these beyond code requirements. So I will say that. I think it's a difficult situation to assess every single case and summarize concisely, but just to sort of summarize some aspect of this, the lighting power density, the watts per square foot, is a value which includes the credit for lighting controls. There's what you install in the room, and then that's adjusted by the control credit that you get. And I guess the assessment, besides myself, a few other people have looked at this, in most cases, using controls with efficient fixtures and ballasts and a good design, you should be able to kind of squeak down to this 10% below, but I respect people who say for their work and their occupancies they're going to have too hard a time with it. So I just want to make it clear that it's not a black and white. It's a kind of a continuum that we're operating on here. As far as specifically with respect to lead requirements will not be affected whatsoever by this ordinance. This ordinance will be requiring people to get closer to lead, actually, but will not affect the lead criteria. What happens in 2014, the next energy code at the state level will take effect in January 2014 as of now. It's not at all clear to me personally that I can stand here and say the same thing in 4 years, that we can go beyond that, because I have to see what they do. We're reaching the limits, we're definitely reaching the limits of what, with current technology, not LEDs that are low cost, but with sort of current high performance technology that's been around for 10 or 15 years, with what can be done. I also say that display lighting for retail stores and hotel lobbies is off the table. That lighting is exempt from the ordinance. Let's see. I think also, just so you know, there were some questions in an email to me. Security lighting is also exempt from this ordinance as well. Let's see, where was I here? So I think that kind of summarizes the gist of it. This isn't a black and white decision. It's a continuum, and we're getting close to the limits. I still would advocate that this is reasonable under the current standards, but I respectfully appreciate the other people's views on this who are also quite knowledgeable about the subject. So.
Great, thank you. Do my colleagues have other questions at this point? Okay, Mr. Hotchkiss?
I got a bunch of them, but I'd like to precede this by reading something from our now Attorney General and also newly elected Governor regarding restrictions, regulations, rules, environmental in particular. And this is quoting from him. He said that the state's regulatory framework burdens, and that's a verb now, burdens businesses and the courts. He decried overregulation and the abundance of laws on California's books. And he said that the state has reached a point when legislating in some instances has become counterproductive, which I suggest may be the case here, which I was obviously the intention of my questions was. When over-prescriptive, laws create a huge and growing amount of overhead, and it does seem that we're reaching the point of counterproductivity. This is the guy that's going to lead the state. We're moving every year to add more and more legal prescription to our lives, to our organizations, to our businesses, and how we shall function. This is all of us now. We overlaid too much with too many rules. The real changes and challenge for lawyers, legislatures, and chief executives is to do no harm and to add to the system ways that give more elbow room. I will re-emphasize this: more elbow room, more flexibility, more discretion, more judgment. Interesting, because that's not what this ordinance does. It gives us less. And it's actually what one of the speakers was talking about when he said, in trying to improve things, we may be making them worse. To go back to the ordinance itself, the Section 1 finding says that the modifications to the 2008 California Building Energy Efficiency Standards required by this ordinance are reasonably necessary due to local climatic conditions. Could you tell me what those are? Because I don't see that.
Well, those were findings that were, I wasn't part of this discussion 3 years, 4 years ago. Those were findings that were submitted to the Building Standards Commission, similar to what other jurisdictions have done, to justify the need to do this. None of these ordinances has ever been tried in court. No court has ever, it's never been challenged, and no court's ever taken the case. So it's really, any local government makes a claim and files that with the state. When they have a local ordinance and the Building Standards Commission accepts them, they file them. The issue has never been debated in court. So
right. Well, I'm debating it here.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to see how, when it's 60 to 75 degrees, 275 days a year. We're talking about local climatic conditions. The only question is, do I turn the fan on or not?
Well, let me just address a part of that. One of the key aspects of the energy code isn't just energy use for the building, it's peak loads. Because the reliability of the power grid is one of the main concerns of the Energy Commission. When there are brownouts and blackouts that affect the whole state, that's of concern to the Commission. It's also of concern to local governments to do what they can to avoid those kind of brownouts and blackouts in their community by cutting the peak loads. Whether it's lighting or other air conditioning, when you require buildings to be built which reduce peak loads, you are increasing the reliability of the grid, and collectively, that definitely does have a significant impact. So,
selfishly speaking, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't recall any recent brownouts due to energy problems. We get them for other more drastic reasons like fires.
Well, this came from the 2001-2002 era when those things were common and even actually a bit more frequently. Okay, I'm just trying to give you the history. I'm not the expert on this,
I would posit that era has changed. In item number 4 here, it says the study has concluded that the energy efficiency measures contained in this ordinance are cost effective. Then I turn back to page 19. Well, before I do that, let's see. In the estimated range right now, I think that we agreed for, at least for dwellings, single-family dwellings, is 75 cents. It goes up to $2.57 for commercial, larger commercial structures. You can hunt that down, but it's in your back there somewhere. But I'm not sure what this cost includes. One thing I don't think it includes is mortgage costs. So if I, in fact, have a 75-cent initial construction cost, I add a mortgage on that, it's now doubled. It's now $1.50, because that's generally, rates being what they are, it's what's going to happen. So these costs are deceptive, and for commercial, it's now up to $5 a square foot. This can get really expensive. I'm trying to be as conservative as I can, because I am really reluctant to do anything that's going to increase the cost, even if it's a cent to anybody these days. Judging the state of our economy, particularly in California, I think that's dangerous territory and very thin ice. I'm really reluctant to do any of this for that reason. And then when I turn back to page 19 on the staff presentation, it says simple payback years for 15% better than Title 24. Option number 1, a 2,025 square foot house. You save annual energy cost savings of $60. I'm not sure where the ones that Grant got. I wish I knew how I could do it, but apparently you can't by this study. And it would take 29.8 years to recover those costs. Now, most people don't own their homes for more than 8 years. Some a lot less, some longer, obviously. But what that means is we're asking them to make an investment that they will never recover. And in fact, the people that buy their house will never recover. And the people beyond that, only till we get down the line about the fourth buyer. I think that's too much to ask. I don't think people are going to do that.
Now, let me just say, too, in response, that these assumptions were extraordinarily conservative in the sense that there's no cost of global climate change mitigation included in this. It assumes no inflation of utility rates. And so it's sort of a simple payback or a straight line payback, is simply a way of trying to compare these options. You raise good points, and there's cost effectiveness. You can look at it in many different ways, and surely you can look at it your way, and there's other ways to look at it too.
And we got to guess. You got to do some guessing here. I understand.
Yeah. But I mean, there's other considerations and other factors that were not put into here as well that could make it look more cost effective. But I was trying to, in fact, do a really conservative assessment of this. So.
Well, another example, just close in, is we're talking about highly efficient water heaters, right? Don't they require different kind of plumbing than a regular water heater?
Yeah, actually, the cost that we included for that would include a larger main. This is for new construction.
Right.
A larger gas main that would accommodate a larger instantaneous flow for an instantaneous water heater. So the cost of that was included in this as well.
I understand. Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, I'm not for this simply because I think it's going to be really expensive and not ultimately pay back what people want. Yeah. Anyway, I didn't mean to. Excuse me if I raised my voice.
One final comment, if I will, just real quickly. The irony about the lighting question is that lighting pays back faster than about anything else. So if you spend a little extra on, if you can do a good design that actually reduces lighting usage, the paybacks can be 3, 4, 5 years as opposed to 30 years. So there's another fact for you. It's complicated.
Thank you, Mr. Hotchkiss. Mr. House?
Fascinating conversation we got here. I was reminding maybe my colleague that the same person who's got elected governor, you should read his 60 or 70 pages of suggestions to local communities on how they can best address SB 32 and AB 375 for energy savings and address climate change in a very responsible way at the most local of levels. And one of the things that I appreciate here is that rather than just taking this at the Sacramento level and bringing it down by fiat, which basically in a sense is what Title 24 is, except it invested itself in input from the industry all across the board, is that they're actually asking local communities what's appropriate, what they can do at their level, and literally just for a few years until Title 24 catches up again. So we only are talking literally at this time right now about a 2 or 3, 4 year maybe maximum delta on this whole thing. So it's something to kind of put into perspective there. A question about something that was raised. Performance-based codes, Mr. Holliday talked about, and the idea that you're looking at the end result. It's not just going through some gesture. So what's that about? Tell me about this. Is it? I mean, you're designing requirements, but the requirements aren't just specific every proscribed thing. The idea is what's the net outcome, right? And could talk to us about that.
The discussion, a lot of the discussion about lighting had to do with what's in the proposed ordinance is what's called a prescriptive path. The permit applicant can show that they meet the ordinance by just doing lighting alone and not including the envelope of the mechanical system. Performance approach lets the designer include the energy efficiency that they can put into the building for the envelope of the building, the shell, the windows, the insulation, shading, the mechanical system, and the lighting system all combined. The computer simulation simulates this building with the lighting, the mechanical, and the envelope all together. So the designer has a lot more flexibility to choose what measures he or she wants to change and sculpt and create to reach the same objective. So that's the approach we use for this cost-effectiveness study. We were trying to use whatever seemed appropriate and most cost-effective, and that's the way the vast majority of permit applicants in residential buildings do it that way. Even in commercial buildings, about half permit applicants don't do the lighting separately. They'll put the lighting together with the mechanical and
Got it. So is that a choice that the developer or the owner makes?
It's in concept. The architect, the owner, and the consultant negotiate and discuss it. The consultant will usually try the prescriptive first. If it works, it's fine. You turn it in. It's simpler to do. But if it requires a performance analysis, typically they'll do that.
I mean, maybe I'm spoiled here in Santa Barbara. I think this is the first time we've had members of the development community come forth and have a strong objection to the energy efficiency goals that we're talking about. We've had, and this maybe is for Mr. Hotchkiss just to know too, the 2030 challenge was initiated within the development community, within our Contractors Association and AIA and APA, and they were very supportive. In fact, they actually initiated and helped author these changes and were very much proactive and hands-on with it, and it's just I'm listening to try to find out what's the nut of the concern among those 5 or however many have actually signed on to this letter having concerns about it. It sounds like the concerns would be if this were only a prescriptive method and that was the only way to achieve it, then we'd really be in a jam. But having a performance-based approach where you can combine all the different technologies in a newly constructed building, that allows the weight to be put on maybe the heating side or the insulation side or some of these other pieces. Am I understanding this correctly?
I think that's right. I think there's also, to be fair about this, only a handful of local governments like Santa Barbara have developed an ordinance, a local prescriptive lighting requirement that's separate from the whole performance approach. I mean, one thing the committee could consider is, dump the prescriptive lighting requirement, but still keep the 15%. So new construction would still include lighting as an efficiency measure, but the permit applicant could still use the envelope of the mechanical system to achieve the overall efficiency.
Okay, I'm fascinated by that. If that's something that would help us get there, the goal ultimately is to have the reduced savings. And it has, again, talking about when we're doing the cost analysis does equal 1 watt equals 1 pound of CO2, right? Isn't that one piece of it? Let me just, if I have any of these other specific questions here. This conversation about reducing peak loads, the CPUC has actually asked us to look into this. And I'm guessing that that's a very big part of the equation. They're attempting to address a statewide, effectively, energy supply crisis or energy demand crisis, whichever way you want to look at it. But looking at it at a local level, is that really what they're driving for?
That's one of the main driving factors.
What,
right.
Another one, then?
Well, I mean the Title 24 metric is not energy use at the building. It's something called time-dependent valuation energy. It's the value of energy where peak electricity is valued way higher than off-peak. So they don't want to have new buildings create new peak loads. They want new buildings and existing buildings that are remodeled to flatten out the peak loads to improve the power grid. So that's definitely
okay. Thank you. One last question for Mr. Estrella. Mr. Estrella, you know how recently we have retrofitted our lighting in our consolidated parking garages here in the city of Santa Barbara, and we've saved considerable amount of money on our energy costs for operating those, and we have brighter illumination inside the garages as well. If we were building the garages today under this REACH code, would we have then designed them with this new kind of lighting in mind to be able to achieve this for 15%? I mean, how would that have been? If I don't anticipate us building another new garage near, soon, but I want to kind of make it in real terms. Like, what would we have done to a big public facility like that would have helped us to achieve this kind of thing? Because I think this is part of it too, isn't it?
Well, the short answer is parking structures are exempted, and so those requirements will not be applicable. It's only for the ordinance.
I see. But we did it anyway. That's interesting, huh?
Money.
And why did we do it?
Be more energy efficient.
And that saved us money.
Considerable amount of money.
Thanks.
Well, so there have been a couple of ideas put out there as ways to make this more user-friendly. One of them, Mr. Gable was just suggesting you said dump the prescriptive approach on the lighting. Is that what you just said? Well, and so where would that, in this ordinance, where would that?
I would provide it as an option. Sorry. I would provide it as an option if lighting designers want to do lighting only and they choose to meet the requirement that way. They could, but it wouldn't be for example, in a TI where you're replacing lighting in a shopping center, you wouldn't be required to do lighting only unless the whole structure were new. So the ordinance says new construction, right? So we can maybe write this that it would exempt TIs, lighting alterations only. If that's the case, then the consultants and the architect could use the prescriptive option when they wanted to, but they could also use the performance option instead. So it would give flexibility, but the trigger wouldn't be every lighting job, essentially. It would just be all new construction.
I'm looking for some moving parts here. Mr. Thompson suggested that the non-residential is that may be a tougher bar to be putting the 15% on the non-residential. So I'm trying to get these things out on the table and see what get the transmission parts out on the garage floor and then see what we can do to put this thing together. Mr. Estrella?
Well, Chair White, at the beginning of the meeting, we did go through a series of some changes, and in fact, we did accomplish that. Originally in the draft ordinances, we were looking at 15% for commercial, and based on some input from the public, including Mr. Thompson, and a discussion with Mr. Gable, we did reduce that to 10%.
Okay, so we're at 10% on that now.
Let me clarify.
Gable?
Sorry, it's so technical, but when a permit applicant is doing an addition and they want to get credit for upgrading the existing building to get that addition to pass, which is what's allowed under the code, we're allowing a 10% threshold. But if addition's more than 500 square feet, the way the proposal is written now, it would be like any kind of new construction, which would be at 15% better than code for commercial buildings and high-rise residential. Sorry about that. So right now the way it stands is the way it's written. If you're doing new construction for commercial buildings, for high-rise residential, hotel, motel, it will be 15% better than Title 24. But if you're doing an addition with an existing building, it's called an existing plus addition analysis. Anyway, it's a little easier. We're not imposing that with the 500 square feet higher threshold. So
there is a place for Mr. Thompson's suggestion to come in here with 10% versus 15.
I mean, it's...
If again, I am trying to, I just have this sneaking suspicion that I'm not going to be able to drag Mr. Hotchkiss along. No. But at the same time, I want to be responsive to some of the concerns and see what we can do to make this thing get a broader base of support. Our public testimony. Yeah, well, we're kind of done with the public testimony, and we're trying to struggle with where we've got a little bit of time left, and where do we go next with this. So those are the pieces that the 10% for non-residential. The TIs are already exempt.
Well, I think it's actually, it's actually not clear the way I'm reading this whether a TI alone, a lighting TI by itself, would have to meet the code. You could make it clear that it wouldn't be required.
Right. And by the way, I want to back up and just say at least a couple of points of my rationale why I'm supportive of the concept. I do believe in person-caused climate change. So I do believe one of the things that we've seen over the life of this work, we have seen our utility representatives, our utilities, spending real money on this in terms of personnel and studies. There's an advocacy base here, which is not just coming out of the Birkenstock-clad community. This is these are a business-based model here, and the notion of building fewer power plants makes sense to me as a citizen and as a parent and grandparent for just trying not to trash this state any more than we have already. So that's kind of my philosophical base behind supporting as much conservation out of this as possible. The dollar numbers, again, as someone who has built a number of homes and been tortured by Title 24 a little bit, I see that as a reasonable trade-off. Even though I think Mr. Hotchkiss makes a point, a couple of the advocates made the point about the climate here. We obviously have as even of a climate as there is. So we're not Indio and we're not on top of Mount Whitney. But we do use a substantial amount of energy to heat, and I like the idea, the notion of lighting. I want to make sure that places are well lit. So I certainly support the notion of dumping the prescriptive element of lighting and making the goal be one of conserving energy as a whole. So that's the basic framework from which I am approaching this supporting this ordinance. But I'd like to. I certainly am game to go with a softer hit on non-residential and also on TIs as at least one step toward pulling this back from where it at least we've heard others have gone.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I may suggest, I tend to concur with this general approach. I think that it's, and I know that some of the folks that spoke earlier would really like to chime in right now, but I think we're going to have another meeting on this, and I'd really like to have their input after our conversation in writing if possible, but certainly please be in touch and let's keep this conversation going. I think that there's, if we're ultimately basing this on performance, I can be very supportive of that. The other steps being optional, I certainly think that's important because there may very well be just a straight-up lighting-saving benefit that just hits the nail on the head, and you could just demonstrate it all right up front and go for it, you know? But I hate to lose that. I don't know that it has to be prescribed. And then the issue with non-residential and residential, I think if we do this well, what we're really doing is nudging things along. I don't think we have to hit people over the head with it. The 15% for residential sounds like an easy mark to get to. Maybe 10% is the right number for commercial, but I think that continuing to take steps forward, that would be my goal in bringing this to City Council. So perhaps in preparation for the next meeting, staff could help us with that. We can take some more input in between, and maybe that will help morph some of this. But I think we're not that far, except for Mr. Hotchkiss. But even there, I think, honestly, I really think that those of us who are business heads, we get our minds around whether we can make this be, really be part of an economy of scale, and that it works for the local, hyper-local, the actual developer or homeowner or business owner. But also we have a community responsibility as well, and I think we all really take it seriously. I really am grateful to everyone who came and spoke today. I really am, because it added some richness to our conversation. Thank you. Oh, and I move that we continue this to a meeting not too far in the future. But, what does staff suggest that we would be able to come back and have some time to answer some of these questions and see if we can get close?
We were looking at December 7th as bringing this back to the full City Council if approved.
Okay. Well, my motion indicates that the December...
You're moving to continue.
To continue.
About putting it before the City Council.
Oh, no, I'm suggesting that this should actually come back to Ordinance Committee. I think everyone here deserves to have one more chance that was my intention, was for it to come back here for us to go over this one more time and then hit City Council with it after that.
We're looking at some dates right now.
I believe next week we are open on the Ordinance Committee, so we could hold it next week. But then the week after that, we are out for the Thanksgiving holiday, and then that's December 7th is the next date.
I think I'll have to look. I would look to staff to know whether that is a reasonable time to take these couple of suggestions and put this.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I think that in order to have an opportunity to have a meaningful discussion with the interested members of the public, I would recommend December 7th as you're returning to the Ordinance Committee again.
Okay. So moved.
Could I make a suggestion that we put it just a little bit farther than that in order to really give people a chance to look at this, because it really needs a look? December 7th is only, that's my recommendation, that we're a week beyond that. I don't know, Grant, what do you think?
Well, we're going to get into the holidays, and then we have 3 meetings in a row which we're going to be dark. So I'm hoping that we can have enough time I really want people to have a chance to chime in on this. We're close enough, and I think the 7th is reasonable. And then it's going to go to City Council. There'll be additional chance for people to chime in if there's something that we've missed.
Okay,
Need a second?
Does that work for you? All right, so we have a motion and a second to continue this to December 7th with the questions as outlined. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, so we'll see you on the 7th, and I think also it'd be great to get Mr. I'm just going to presume Mr. Deinhardt's questions in writing. If you could provide those to us, that would be great. To Mr. Estrella, after the meeting, you can get his statistics there, or his email and whatever, card. So thank you very much. Thank you all for showing up today, and hopefully we can make some meaningful progress on this. That's great, to either to Mr. Estrella or Ms. Peterson, too.